family. We're back with another great edition of the Building Rapport segment. Joining us, we got our special guest, host of Mac and Cube and the Cube Show pod, Cole Cubelic joins us, former SEC lineman, Auburn letterman. Cole, thanks for joining us, man. I want to talk today a little bit about Payton Thorne. You shared a lot. You shared your thoughts. Isaac and I want to dig in today on what you think of this pickup for Hugh Freeze in the portal, and what kind of impact he's going to make. So, again, starting, what kind of impact do you think Payton Thorne can make here in year one for Hugh Freeze?
Well, based on things I've posted, things I've said, probably have a pretty good idea that I'm a fan of the get, and I think it's a really good get for Hugh Freeze for Auburn. There's a lot to like about Payton Thorne. Now, were there portions of the film last year that weren't as good? Sure. I think some of that was based on protection. I think some of that was him trying to play through some injuries. There's a mild injury concern that he has dealt with and how it was processed. Maybe some people might have some worries about that. I think really that's in his past. I'm not overly concerned about it moving forward. But to me, he's a guy that just understands, how to process an offense and how to go out and manage and run an offense. I don't use that with negative connotation. When I say run an offense or be a game manager, there's no negative connotation in that for me at all. I think it's actually the first and foremost thing you have to do as a quarterback is know how to go out and operate an offense. It's the most important thing you do. If you don't know who to get the ball to, what protection to get to, which way to direct a run, which play to get out of, most importantly, that's going to lead to catastrophe plays. And although he does have some turnovers, I do feel like he avoids catastrophe plays the majority of the time. I saw Coach Freeze at the Lutzenkirchen golf tournament, and he and I were talking a little bit about him before we kind of got started. And, I told Coach Freeze, I said, you'll laugh when I tell you my favorite thing about him. And he's like, well, what's that? I said, the kid loves to check down. And he kind of looked at me and he was taken aback a little bit. And he's like, now that you mentioned it, he said, he's not afraid of that. And Coach Freeze went on to say, he said, the thing about that is that's how you live in 2nd and 6 or 3rd and 4 and 3rd and 2, as opposed to 3rd and 12 or 2nd and 10 or 2nd and 11. And so he understands how to put people in good positions and how to help the offense be successful. He can get through his progressions, get through the reads. He has enough mobility and escapability to elude the rush. I think you could still design a couple of things for him with his legs, and he would be effective. You're not going to lean on it. It's not going to be, something like with Robbie was towards the end of last year, where you're designing it, a lot of the time. But he can be dangerous with it, and he's got enough of an arm to push the ball down the field. He's pretty accurate down the field. Now, we're coming off of an NFL draft where we sort of obsessed with arm strength. And, Anthony Richardson hitting the top of the facility and, Will Levis throwing it as hard as he did. But he's not going to be in that category ever. It's not who he is. But accuracy, the ability, and the lack of fear to test the middle of the field, which actually I think he might do more of in this offense. They didn't do it a ton at Michigan State, but he's not afraid to do it. The anticipation of where to put the ball on a lot of routes. He levels the ball extremely well. So he can get the ball up and over zone coverage and have an understanding of where the receiver is going to be, as opposed to trying to throw it through coverage at a certain point in time. So these are all nerdy things that I've learned from McElroy the last couple of years that I begin to now notice on film. But he's a gamer, man. Listen, he's a 2-time captain at Michigan State. That's not easy to do.
Yeah.
And I understand some people say, well, as a quarterback, he's always the captain, but you still have to go out and lead your team.
Right.
And there's a toughness about him, taking some big hits, trying to run through tackles at times. And then, the leadership is going to be there. I know some people that are pretty close to him, and I've had a lot of conversations in depth about his personality. And I think the leadership portion, the attitude, the demeanor is going to be very presidential. It's going to be what a quarterback most likely needs to be successful at the collegiate level. And he has been very successful at times. So I just think it's a great get, because there are certain aspects that you'd love to have. But I think the best case scenario for Coach Freeze in this quarterback cycle was to go find a guy that's kind of B+ across the board and doesn't have any major drawbacks. And I think with Payton Thorne, you get that. So it's a little bit safe, but I think based on everything else that they brought in, it's got a chance to be an even better get.
Cole, we've talked a lot on our show, and you just kind of mentioned it about just needing to raise the floor of what the room is going to be. And Payton Thorne absolutely checks the boxes on that. But let's talk about the ceiling, though, right? You said he doesn't have this monstrous arm, right? So he's not going to wow anybody with that. But some people have been quoted as saying that the addition of a guy like Payton Thorne makes Auburn a bowl game or a bowl appearance team. Where do you feel like the ceiling is with a guy like Payton Thorne when you look at kind of the landscape of what Auburn is athletically around him and with that offensive line being retooled?
You guys know how I am with numbers. We've talked about it before. Like, I don't like the whole have to win this number of games or will win this number of games definitively. And I absolutely would not put that on Payton Thorne. Because as I stated before, he's not Cam Newton. He's not Lamar Jackson. He's not Johnny Manziel, where he's just going to be able to run around and do all these things himself athletically from a power perspective or an arm strength perspective. I mean, he's not Anthony Richardson. So, but I think, like I stated earlier, based on other things that have been added, all of a sudden, I do think you have that potential to maybe extend a little bit over what people think Auburn can be. You put him in there now with bringing in Dylan Wade and Avery Jones and Gunnar Britton and, some guys up front, Jaden Muskrat. Like, the offensive line has a real chance to be better and to be one of the better units on the team because the talent in that room has been upgraded significantly. Ronaldo Fairweather is a better pass catching tight end than Auburn had on the roster. And I think lined up out wide or in line, he can be a real receiving threat. He can be a matchup problem for a lot of people they're going to face. I think Jair Shorter is the best wide receiver on the team that you get in from North Texas. I mean, he's a 6'2", 205, 210-pound receiver who can run past DBs. Like, I've seen him do it on film. I've seen DBs have leverage and have a step on him, and he has the ability to put it into another gear and run past them with a big catch radius and pretty reliable hands. You add that to a Brian Battie, who's going to be able to be sort of your Swiss Army knife, your utility player. You can motion him out of the backfield. You can run two-back sets with him. He can line up in the slot. He can catch screens. So I think now with how you've upgraded the roster on that side of the football, and the other side helps as well, but especially who you're going to have around him. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're actually able to protect the quarterback, which we haven't seen a lot of that at Auburn the last couple of years, generate, a consistent rushing attack. And it's not just because, the running back literally runs like his hair's on fire every time he touches the ball, which is what Tank brought the last couple of years, but by design. And then you have some flex hybrid players that can move around, line up in different places that allow you to motion guys, motion teams, formation teams, move different players, lining up in different places to be able to get matchups you want. And you have players who can win those matchups. Now Payton Thorne gives you the ability to extend past what people thought you could be. So if the roster was the same and he just came in, I would tell you, it might be a little bit better, but I don't know significantly if I'm looking at going from 4 wins to 7 wins. But with everything else that's been brought in and the offensive line having a real chance to be pretty good and the receiving core being upgraded to the extent that it has, and keep in mind, Hugh Freeze told us on our show a while back, he's like, I need 8 or 9 receivers to run this offense, and we were at a point where we weren't sure if there was going to be 1 or 2 that could go out and be that guy in the SEC. Well, you might have 4 or 5 now, which makes you a hell of a lot more capable than if you have 1 or 2. And then if you add the tight end who's able to be a mismatch guy that can catch, 25, 35 balls, but can be someone that people have to pay attention to, that makes you very different offensively. Then you add in a little bit of tempo. And then if you add in, let's just, roll the ball down the street here. You add in a change-up quarterback that can give you a dynamic run dimension that teams have to defend, and potentially you can bring in and also have that in your arsenal. Now it makes you dangerous in a lot of different ways. So Payton Thorne individually, I don't know if it makes Auburn significantly different, but with what else has been added and the way that he operates in offense, I think it does make Auburn significantly different.
Cole, join me in my nightmare for a second, right? The last 3 quarterbacks at Auburn all had issues with pass protection, right? Like Bo Nix, famously just seemingly always on the run, but he could run, so he could make some things happen. TJ Finley, complete disaster behind an offensive line that couldn't protect. Robbie Ashford, again, can make some things happen, but not a great quarterback while running for his life. Can Payton Thorne raise the ceiling in this quarterback room, or the floor in this quarterback room, if offensive line play, for whatever reason, does not improve? What does Hugh Freeze do if offensive line plays on par with what they did last year?
if that's the case, then number one, some of these wins that you've had are going to end up being pointless. Number two, it doesn't. I mean, unless you have Lamar Jackson or Johnny Manziel, it's not really going to matter. I do think, though, from a ball distribution standpoint and an understanding and a recognition of where coverage is, where leverage is, where zones are, where uncovered zones are, he still is probably going to have a better idea how to attack those things. And maybe just a better understanding of I don't have to just leave in order to complete a pass. I can wait and then quickly distribute the football here, and we're going to have a chance to win this play. Right. Again, that all goes into operating the offense and the understanding of how much time you're going to have, when you're going to have time, where that lack of time is going to be coming from, and how and where and to who you need to distribute the ball to. So I think it would still be a little bit better just based on his capabilities and what he's shown me on film. But if that offensive line's not any better, it might not matter who's at quarterback. I mean, listen, right. I've said that Lamar Jackson winning the Heisman Trophy behind the offensive line that he had is the most impressive individual feat I've seen in college football ever. I think you guys know where I stand on Cam's season. Like, there's not another NFL touchdown reception or rushing attempt, and there's only one offensive lineman that started, and that was in a reserve role from that Auburn offense in 2010. So he has the best season of any quarterback ever. But, I mean, he's not that guy. Payton Thorne's not that guy. So if the offensive line doesn't improve, the offense doesn't really improve very much. Now, this offense does have a way to mask a little bit of that with tempo, with the way that some of the run game is going to operate, with some of the read plays, be it quarterback read, RPOs, things of that nature. They can mask it to an extent. That's why if it just goes from a D- to a C+ or a B-, it's going to look even more dramatically different than it really is.
Right.
And that offense can aid that to a certain extent.
Okay. Well, you hinted at something here that I thought was interesting about the change up at quarterback, right? How likely, viewing what Hugh Freeze has done historically and just what you find in the athlete that Robbie Ashford is, do you think that he's going to get opportunities to come in and be that change of pace if Payton Thorne wins the starting job?
I think they would love for him to be. I think Robbie Ashford can be a good college quarterback, not just a good college football runner who takes snaps. And it's one of the big, we talk about it all the time. Are you a quarterback or are you an athlete playing quarterback?
Right.
And, right now he's more of an athlete than he is a quarterback, but there's plenty of time for him to still develop. Go back to Hoover. He misses the majority of his senior year with an injury. Go to Oregon, almost no reps at all. And then, through his first spring, didn't really begin to get heavy reps until late in that spring. And then obviously wasn't the guy going into the season, so didn't get a ton of reps there. Like, he's got growth still left in him. I think it's just going to come down to him personally. And does he want to utilize that patience? Does he have the patience inside of him? Does he have an understanding? Can that staff try to get with him and paint the picture of this is what's still left? And if you wait and if you try, and if you take the opportunity that's going to be provided, you can turn into this. And I think Payton Thorne's leadership and demeanor can help with that, possibly. Now, we don't ever know how things like that are going to work out. We don't know how guys are going to get along. We don't know, what guys are going to accept certain roles. But I know Hugh Freeze would love to have a role for him because he is that dynamic of a runner. He can change who you are offensively in a lot of different ways. And that could be, that could be red zone. I mean, hell, guys, it's been happening for a long time. Like, Damian Craig was the red zone quarterback his redshirt freshman year. Like, when they got inside the 20, he came in and they ran sprint outs and bootlegs. That's just what they did. And he would read it. And if he kept it and ran it, fine. If he saw something open, he would throw it. So whether it's red zone, short yardage, whether it's just, 12, 15 plays a game intermittently in different packages, that will also help his growth as just becoming a better quarterback. And he's still going to get quality reps if he's the backup. So, because you want to develop your backup if you lose your starter.
Right.
It could all greatly benefit him down the road, but he's got to buy in.
Right.
That's the most important part of it. I don't think I wouldn't put the majority of that on Hugh Freeze. I wouldn't put that on Coach Montgomery. I would put it on Robbie Ashford's acceptance of it. If he buys in and wants to do it, it can pay off for him down the road. Absolutely.
Cole, I want to talk a little bit about quarterbacking in today's SEC. We've seen some pretty dynamic quarterbacks over the last few years. Mac Jones had a pretty prolific season, back in 2020. Tua, Bryce Young, these guys that are coming through. Joe Burrow in 2019, just fantastic quarterback play with guys who were absolutely carrying their teams. And then you had Stetson Bennett in year one of the Georgia back-to-back, who was what I would call a game manager. Now, you host a show with a guy who I would say was probably more on the game manager side, but had a ton of talent around him, right? And my question is, given what you know about Payton Thorne, and you touched on it earlier, but I want to go back to it, do you feel like there is enough talent around Payton Thorne for Auburn to find success with him at quarterback? Or is this just kind of a middling team that, should hope to win 8 games and that they would be lucky to do that?
I don't bring a negative connotation with that ever, whether it's
right.
McElroy, whether it was Brandon Cox, Ben Leard, Stan White, Jay Barker. Like, I'm thinking of guys who people would probably mostly categorized that way.
Mm-hmm.
And the ultimate litmus test with this should be Joe Burrow, because after 2019, I guarantee you the majority of college football fans would have categorized him as a game manager. He was LSU's short yardage back. They ran 2 and 3 tight ends probably 60-70% of the time. They were 6 and 7 man protection more than 70% of the time. They were a run-heavy, play-action, heavy protection offense that took their shots occasionally. And then all of a sudden, a completely different offense comes in 2019, and he has the greatest quarterback statistically that anybody's ever had in the history of college football. So there is a portion of the game manager tag that I view more as, it's not what you do, it's what you're allowed to do or asked to do. Okay. Either way you want to state that. McElroy wasn't asked to throw the ball 40 times a game, but I've seen him push the ball down the field. He had a pretty good arm. Brandon Cox was super accurate. Could have probably picked teams apart and diced you up and down the field. It wasn't going to be 20 deep balls a game, but could have worked you over the middle of the field and on the perimeter and in the flat and made you pay for what you weren't going to cover and thrown the ball 45 times a game if they wanted to. But that really wasn't who they were then. Ben Leard held the single game passing record for a long time against Georgia in '99 when we went over there and smoked them. But he wasn't. He may have never thrown the ball 40 times in a game. Maybe the bowl game against Michigan, he got close, but that wasn't who we were. So sometimes it's not what you're capable of; it's what the offense allows you to be capable of. So moving ahead with that, I believe there's enough talent there right now with Payton Thorne to allow this offense to be pretty good. I think you have added 2, maybe 3 receivers that can give you different capabilities to do things on the perimeter. You've added some big bodies, physical, 50-50 ball, matchup problems at wide receiver. You've added a tight end that can be a matchup problem, that has a big catch radius, that can be kind of a get-out-of-jail-free card a lot of the times, that can help you with certain things. You've added a back that you're going to be able to move, do different things with, that can help you in a lot of different ways. And most importantly, you've just upgraded the talent on the offensive line. And I have confidence in Jake Thornton. So I think he can find a way to pull that together. Here's the big picture of all of it, though. So Coach Freeze and his staff, they've cleared the first hurdle. And the first hurdle was becoming the head coach, naming your staff, and then going and upgrading the talent. Okay. And some of that you maybe lob in, getting through spring practice, media, whatever. So they've cleared the first hurdle. Well, the second hurdle becomes organization, chemistry, wherewithal, understanding, and then preparation for a season. And then the last hurdle after that becomes motivation. So now you take this talent that you've upgraded, that you've got in, the new systems and schemes that you have. Now can you go allow them to find some continuity and develop some leadership in certain spots? And then can you find a way for them to all get on the same page, sort of organize it to a certain extent with what you're going to do? It's not just showing up for meetings on time or having your shoes tied at practice. It's, do you understand the concepts of the offense that we're running? Like, do you understand situationally why we want to do this here? And then after that, it's putting all that together and then motivating guys to go out and play their asses off on a regular basis. So I think they've cleared the first hurdle by a mile, because I mean, you're looking at more than half of this football team. Realistically, we can make an argument right now that more than half the starters on this football team are going to be transfers that this staff brought in.
Yeah,
I wasn't sure that was possible. I'm just going to be honest with you guys. And I understand that, On to Victory has a big part in this, and the guys running that are just brilliant human beings, and they have aided in that. That's been a big portion of it. But at the same time, the staff's busted it and gone out and located guys that they thought they could get, been able to go out and get those wins and bring them in. And whether it's wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, center, both tackles, one guard, nose guard, D tackle, both linebackers. I mean, you're looking at the majority of this football team as far as starters and guys going to get the majority of reps are going to be players that this staff brought in a very short period of time. So you've cleared that obstacle. That hurdle is long gone. We're way past that. But now it's not like it's any easier to get everybody on the same page. It's not a whole lot easier to make sure everybody understands conceptually what you're doing and, most importantly, why you're doing it. And that's a big part of college football that has gotten away from a lot of people. That's why certain position groups have their own signalers. It's why, teams sometimes do go fast and they only have 2 or 3 plays they can run. It's because the concepts and the hows and whys of what you're doing are not necessarily taught. And sometimes that's because coaches don't want to. Sometimes they don't think that they're capable of getting it to the guys, or the guys are capable of learning it. But when you can learn why you're doing things as opposed to just what you're supposed to do, your world will open up in a major way. So that's a big obstacle that these coaches have in front of them going into the season. And then are they going to be motivated? Like, motivating in today's college football is very different. I mean, it's a lot different to get guys to play hard now than it was 5 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago. It's just a different game, and guys are motivated by different things. So they have a few more big hurdles to clear, but they're in a good spot to be able to do that. And then if they do, I think they can go out, and I think there are pieces. The pieces of this puzzle are there to be able to put it together and probably exceed expectations. The other problem is going to be, like we talked about this on, Greg and I talked about this the other day. Let's just take Alabama and LSU and push them to the side. And let's say they're going to be 10, 11, 12 win football teams. They're both going to be good. So they're kind of separators in the West. I think you really look at A&M, at Arkansas, at Ole Miss, at Auburn, and at Mississippi State as very, very, very similar going into this year. Now, A&M's roster, top end talent, a little bit better. Yeah. Do they have a culture problem? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not there. I'm not in that facility. But there were some things that showed up last year that screamed culture problem. Mississippi State got a returning quarterback. Yeah. Completely different end of the spectrum as far as systems are concerned. I mean, those guys were running, they were taking vertical pass sets 70 times a game, and now they're going to be running stretch zone 30 times a game. Like, those are different worlds to live in.
Right.
Ole Miss looks like they've got more talent than they've had in a while. New coordinator on defense. They've upgraded the defensive line. They had some big hits on that side of the ball. But new coordinator there. Do they have a quarterback issue? Can they keep replenishing these receivers that keep leaving? But they got the best running back in college football. So they got a pretty good starting point right there. Arkansas has just a man-child at quarterback. New system, new scheme. Is it going to work? Does he have enough weapons? They lost their 2 best offensive linemen. Yeah. I mean, they lost their tight end. So I don't know exactly what that's going to look like. So I think that you've got a couple of teams that look like they could just log jam in the West, but someone's going to separate.
Right.
Someone's going to be a 9-10 win team right there behind LSU and Alabama that is either knocking on the door, or we look at and we say, no, that's clearly the 3rd best team in the division. It just is. And you probably look at it and say it's going to come down to, for me, schedule, quarterback, and depth. So who's in the best spot there? Ole Miss apparently has the hardest schedule in the country. Auburn's like 4th. Arkansas is like 6th. Mississippi State and A&M are a little bit lower, but it's not like any of them are easy schedules.
Right.
I don't look at any of those teams and say, oh, they're in a lot better space when it comes to depth. Like, I think A&M may be a little bit better. Hell, Mississippi State's got a first-time head football coach.
Right.
Auburn's the all new scheme, but it's a guy that's done it in this league. So there's a lot of sort of give and take between those teams and who's going to end up being different than the other ones, and probably staying healthy and quarterback play will ultimately end up being the difference.
Let's say, tomorrow by some twist of fate, Auburn hires Cole Cubelic as the offensive analyst, right? And you're game planning for this team. You're trying to figure out what world do you want to live in as an offense. What do you feel like the distribution needs to be like? What do you feel like, as you can see it right now, as it's constructed, should be the identity of this team? Is it going to be lean heavy on the run and we're going to go play action? I know what Hugh Freeze's system, the Freeze-Montgomery system is, but knowing all of those things, how do you feel like success needs to come for this offense with the personnel that exists right now?
I mean, I think, as you guys know, there'll be some personnel questions that are going to have to be answered before we get there, specifically at running back. And then I want to see the receivers and what they're capable of. So I want to see Jay Fair, more of him in live situations. I want to see Camden Brown in more live situations. And then I want to see how Ronald Fairweather fits in, because I want to use 1 and 2 tight end sets. So I think you have some options there as how you're going to be able to utilize that. But if Avery Jones and Dylan Wade, and especially Jeremiah Wright, who's a guy that not a lot of people are talking about going into this season, who I think has a chance to be a legit SEC guard, and just he brings the oomph and can be a real MFer up front on that offensive line, they might be able to be a run heavy team. And again, some of that depends on the backfield and what that looks like. I don't know the answers to all those questions right now, but I think it could be a team that utilizes bigger personnel a lot of the time, that can also be versatile, that you can move around, and maybe even some 2-back stuff, which I think is very difficult to defend right now. Go look at what Lincoln's doing. Look at what Oklahoma's still doing. Look at what some of South Carolina's doing. Not a lot of people utilize 2-back, and the Sark does a lot of 2-back stuff. It's not easy to defend because people never see it. I talked to Saban about that at media days like 2 years ago, because everybody was doing it then. It was like coming back, and he's like, we hate it. He's like, because our guys don't know it. They have no idea. They don't even know what to call it half the time, because they're going to move somebody more than likely. So it's either a tight end in the backfield or an H-back, or when there's 2 backs, one can be a receiver or a receiver in the backfield. Like, look at Devonta Smith when he won the Heisman and how many times they lined him up in the backfield. So I think it could be a run-heavy, versatile offense that doesn't have to utilize tempo to be successful, but you would have tempo as a weapon to be able to use when you needed it or when you wanted it. And I do think that I would want to use I'm not going to say a 2-quarterback system, because it's not going to be 50-50 or 60-40, but I would love the ability to utilize Robbie as a legitimate run threat, because he can create explosive plays. And let's be honest, if you can create explosive plays, you're going to win football games. It's just it. You're going to flip the field. You're going to put yourself in scoring position, and you're going to get points. Like, that's the main things you want to do offensively. Like, get me to the other side of the field, get me in position to score, and then help me find points. Explosive plays do that for you. So, and he can create those. But if the offensive line, I mean, it's hard to really say, because I would need to see it and see what we actually had at our disposal. But I think based on what's there, it can be a group that leans on the run and is run heavy, because I think Payton Thorne is pretty effective in play action and RPO.
Yeah,
we got to run the ball to do those things. Like, RPO doesn't make a lot of sense if you can't run the ball. My linebacker's just going to sit at depth and let you try to throw through that window, and you're going to miss a lot. So that's what I think they can be, and probably what I would want them to be.
Cole, I want to close the show out talking a little bit about, again, guys that are going to be around Payton Thorne. You released a video on the Cube Show pod talking about Quinshon Judkins being the best returning back in college football. However, I do feel like Jarquez Hunter is maybe a little slept on, because he wasn't the lead back last year with Tank, but he had a ridiculous yard per carry average, clearly talented, going to be one of the better backs in this league. If he starts every game. How much of an advantage do you think that having Jarquez having maybe like a top 3 running back is going to be for Payton Thorne in year one, like you said, because you're saying these guys that maybe got labeled game managers, they weren't being asked to do a lot, but they had people around them that could, do things that, allowed you to not ask your quarterback to go out and be, win the Heisman every play. How much of an advantage do you think having Jarquez Hunter at running back is going to be for Payton?
Just first and foremost, when you have a back that you can lean on, it allows you to be much more selective as a quarterback. So you can pick and choose your times that you want to attack. And when a defense is uncertain of when the quarterback is going to attack, that affects pass rush, that affects your pressure mentality, and it affects your coverage, because you're not going to get overly aggressive in any of those ways if you're uncertain or the percentages don't tell you when the quarterback is most likely to attack you. And if those percentages of how you have to play lean heavily towards stopping the run, that gives quarterbacks advantages in a lot of other places. That could be attacking the middle of the field because the safety's got to play down against a run. It could be one-on-one coverage on the outside where you're going to take your shots, which, Hugh, similar to Gus, like they have a certain amount of shot plays, just like Coach Montgomery. They want to take every game. They're going to take those shot plays. They're going to happen. You're going to get them. So it just opens up so much more that you can be capable of. We talked earlier about RPO and play action. They're not effective when you can't run the ball. Like I laugh watching film sometimes of these teams that are sitting there trying to run heavy play action that they don't run the ball. Like they can't do it. It's like, why do you think teams like Ohio State last year just completely get away from that and just start throwing the ball around? Because they're not super effective running it, and like nobody's biting on it. So I think if you can open that up, it completely changes the world that you live in, because you're going to be presented with different things defensively that give you the percentage chances of going out and winning certain matchups, whether it's a one-on-one on the outside, whether somebody's giving you the middle of the field to attack with a tight end or a slot receiver, or whether somebody's playing light and that's going to give you more advantages of just handing the ball off. It could be checking the ball to the back in the flat out of the backfield because they're trying to bring extra pressure and that's one of their uncovered zones. And all of a sudden it goes for 18 yards. So I think it would be massive to have a back that was feared. Again, go back and look what Tank did the last 2 years when he was given the opportunity, which I'm on record of saying multiple times. He flat out didn't get the ball enough. And I don't care if the offensive line was shitty or was great or was okay or was average. Like, he flat out didn't get the ball enough. And he's a tone setter. He was a guy that could completely change the makeup of a game because of those things. Like how people approached it, how people defended it, how people played it, what he could possibly do to you. I think Judkins is one of those guys. Like there's a clip I posted last year. I think it was A&M, and he kind of busts into the hole and he's one-on-one with a safety with like a 5-yard head start. And I think like basically what I said in the clip was and he ends up coming up to him and like completely shaking him out of his shoes. But he could have run his ass over. And like I think basically what I just said was, imagine being this dude with this back having a 5-yard head start, and he can run you over, but you also have to try to tackle somebody that's as quick as that can just and now he's gone. And I wouldn't want to have to make those decisions, but that's what you force teams to do when you have that guy in the backfield. And so it changes the dynamic of your football team completely.
Random. I don't know that I'm going to include this. Who did better in the portal? Hugh Freeze or Deion Sanders?
Man, that's interesting. Because I will be fair and say I haven't done a deep dive on all of the kids that Colorado got. On the surface, I feel like Hugh did a better job because he was also in a better position where he had specific areas that he had to have wins.
Right.
He had to get offensive linemen. He had to get wide receivers. He had to beef up that defensive line, and he did it. And then other places where we kind of wondered, linebacker, they went and had big wins there. Edge, they had to have bodies at edge. Did they get all of them that they wanted? No, but they got a couple good ones that I think are going to help. Deion just needed everything, anything. People forget they won one game.
Almost 50 guys they picked up, Cole.
Right, but they also got a kid. Some people might not believe it, but has a chance to be an elite quarterback in high level college football. They got a couple skill guys that are going to be able to play.
Yeah, I looked at Shedeur Sanders' tape, and I was actually pleasantly surprised at how good he
throw
looked.
The ball.
Yeah.
I mean, he now and if you looked at his tape, you also know, like I do, he did not have a lot of time to throw the ball.
No, their offensive
So,
line wasn't good, but they kept him at one read most of the time, trying to get out of the
imagine if he does have a little bit of time to be able to work different portions of the field. So it's almost an unfair question, because there were two different goals that had to be achieved there. Dion just needed, like, he was grasping at air. Like, he needed some level of oxygen. Like, Hugh just needed antibiotics. And, like, Colorado was on life support. Auburn had a broken leg. And so, like, Hugh went and got a cast put on it and got it taken care of. Like, Dion's like, okay, like, we're off the ventilator now. Now, they still got a long way to go, but, you know, they're off life support because he just went and upgraded the overall talent in a way that most people did not think was imaginable. So if you're asking me for this upcoming season, Auburn did a better job, because I think they got more impact players that can go out and win at their position for you this year. But it was also a major culture shift, which Coach Prime had to have to be able to kickstart that thing and even be somewhat competitive this year.
Well, Cole, I want to thank you for joining us to talk about Payton Thorne and the job that Hugh Freeze is doing this offseason going into year one. It's going to be interesting. We got SEC Media Days coming, so I know I'll see you there. We're all going to have plenty of questions for these coaches. But thank you for giving us a little bit of your time. Before we leave, tell the folks where they can find you, where they can listen to you and find all your content.
No, I appreciate you guys always. It's always fun joining you. Podcast Cube Show is Instagram, Twitter @CubeShow. Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, trying to get the subscribers up. I'm trying to catch up with you guys. I still got a long way to go, but it's @CubeShow61 on YouTube, and McElroy and Cubelic in the morning, weekday mornings, 7 to 10 on JocksFM.com or the app. Just search WJOX in your app store.
So guys, that's it for another great edition of Building Rapport with our guy, Cole Cubelic. If you want more content like this, please hit like and subscribe. We are the War Rapport on every social media platform, TW Rapport on TikTok. We're signing off, and as always, War Eagle.
War Eagle.